I'm Andy Chang. I'm a product manager at Google with the security team, and very excited to be your lunchtime entertainment. We're going to talk today about enhancing your security posture using Cloud Security Command Center. One of the things we're very excited to announce is that the Cloud Security Command Center is now generally available. And so you can use that with your production loads. We're excited to see feedback from the customers that are going to adopt it, and we're very, very appreciative of all the folks who've been part of the beta, who have helped us kind of mature the product as it's gone and was launched in beta back in December. So if you guys, this is, I think, probably the first session after the keynotes. In your mobile app, we're having a dory. And that dory is a process by which you can enter in the questions while the talk is going on. And then at the end with Q&A, we'll be alternating between live questions and questions you've asked. So today we're going to talk about a few things. First, give you a short overview of the Cloud Security Command Center, and then really pin the rest of the talk on an illustrative example of an end-to-end visibility, prevention, detection, response scenario. And then we're going to break down the underlying pieces, because the Cloud Security Command Center is really focused on 5 key capabilities to help you understand your attack surface, your security posture on Google Cloud Platform. Visibility, vulnerability prevention, threat detection, response, and then data management. So the Cloud Security Command Center is the single pane of glass and the single unified platform as a managed service on Google Cloud for you to understand what's going on across all of your organizational resources, the security sources that feed you findings for vulnerabilities and detections, and really to cross-correlate that with the business context of your resources, as well as with the time element, both history, what's happening now, what's happening then. Our goal really is to provide that one place for you to gather all that information in context and then make decisions, figure out what to do next. In addition, we are the hub for a range, and you'll see a number of these, of the native Google security products that are providing you either vulnerability or threat detection. Again, bringing those all in one place. In addition to the native security products, we're also the place that you can bring in your own favorite set of security tools also in one place, so you can holistically get the benefit of all the different detections. And finally, one thing to note, we want to meet you as customers where you are, so you can either consume the Command Center through its own UI, or, as we'll talk about in the capabilities, export that data, use it in your own SIM like Splunk. And so everything that I show you in the demos is also available through API. And the last thing I want to cover out, and it was talked about, I think, by Thomas and the team at the keynote. So Command Center today is focused on asset side, the GCP assets, but on the findings side, you can load findings from not only GCP resources, your findings in hybrid, your findings across other clouds, and again, join those in one place. So the Cloud Security Command Center, from a UI standpoint, has 3 main components. First is the dashboard component, and that's where we bring alerting of things that have happened around your assets, things that are around going on your findings in one place. You can do some high-level views of things relative to time, and it's really where we bring your attention to all the different things that are surfacing signals on your system. We then also have 2 inventories, which is where the bulk of the UI work will be done by you folks. They're really the asset inventory, where you can take an asset-centric view and slice of looking at what's running, and therefore be able to look at what's running right now, what's been running historically, be able to generate on-demand scanning of the assets to update the assets, be able to, either for the findings or the assets, look at the time change. So look at how assets today compare to assets from some time previously, and also how findings today compared against findings previously. You also, at that point in the inventories, can export. You have the export control to GCS. And importantly, as we'll talk about in data management, you're able to use the security marks, the ability for you to put ACLed annotations on your data, which allow you to group them, allow you to actually integrate with workflow, and so you can track changes on your assets, on your findings through this marking system. The final piece from an organization standpoint from the Cloud Security Command Center are the detail pages. We provide for each finding and each asset a detail page, which summarizes the properties and the attributes of those assets or findings, and you can explore more and understand what's going on with each. Importantly, all the attributes and properties of the assets and findings are available themselves as join and pivot parameters in our underlying queries. So the purpose of the Cloud Security Command Center is to be a central hub. We're going to step back a bit and talk about how it sits in the native product portfolio of Google Cloud for security. When we think about security and providing you native services on Google Cloud Platform, we think first of helping you find vulnerabilities and weaknesses. What's going on? What's potentially a weak point in your system? In addition, we think about helping you find actual activity that's potentially malicious, identifying threats, detecting those threats. The Cloud Security Command Center sits in the middle of all of this and is able to bring the vulnerabilities, the threats, the business context, the underlying assets in one place. And lastly, trigger actions, either single actions or workflow. Because the Cloud Security Command Center is not built just for GCP, we also integrate with partner solutions in each of those places, whether it's finding vulnerabilities through our partner solutions, finding threats through partner solutions, being able to export to partners so they can use the data, or to actually enhance kind of threat response. To put this a little bit more practically in detail as to specific products, again, Cloud Security Command Center announcing GA today. On the prevention side, there's a number of products, the first of which is the Cloud Security Scanner, which has been in GA for App Engine since 2015. And recently, we announced to public beta for the GCE and GKE versions of that. That provides application-level threat prevention. In addition, we're proud to announce the public alpha of our Security Health Analytics, and that is managed scanning for common vulnerabilities across your GCP organization, and that's being launched to public alpha today. In addition, Cloud Armor, which provides network and WAF capabilities, is in GA and provides network vulnerability detection. And finally, from a supply chain standpoint, the ability from your software supply chain to look at and control what actually gets deployed from a binary authorization standpoint. And binary authorization at the conference is being announced also at GA. Those are some of the native tools from the vulnerability side that integrate directly into Cloud Security Command Center. In addition, we're proud to announce today our beta for the event threat detection. So that is log-based threat detection that takes your stack driver logs for VPC flow logs, firewall logs, authentication logs, Fluentd logs, and applies Google Threat Intelligence to do active threat detection, and those results integrate into Command Center as well. As we mentioned, we have I'm very proud of a rich ecosystem of security partners, and those security partners, and we'll talk about later in this deck as well, are being integrated into Command Center. So whether you use native tools, whether you use your own favorite security partners, or the combination of those, in one place you can see that in context and get protected, secure yourself using the best of what's available. In addition, this thus far has talked about visibility, prevention, and detection. Also, we enable you to trigger actions. So as we'll see later in the demos, the ability to trigger cloud functions to take direct action to fix and remediate the threats and vulnerabilities we found. And also, we're announcing our alpha integration in Command Center to triggering stack driver incident response management so that you can take findings that you found in Command Center, make them as signals, either in new incidents or add them to incidents, and then manage the whole incident response process through our IRM process. So I know that's a lot, and we're actually going to demo most of this in the latter part of this talk. So to kind of ground this in a scenario, we're going to talk about something that I think probably occurs fairly often for folks, crypto mining. So it's a common situation that you, if you're running infrastructure, whether it's your on-prem or your hybrid or in clouds, potentially there are cases where the bad guy has gotten access to your VM, starts deploying malware, and now you've got to figure out how to actually detect it, how to figure out, tie it back to a vulnerability so that you can reduce that vulnerability, figure out how to get forensics so you can actually figure out who the bad actor was, establish the blast radius, and then bring yourself back to a secure state. So in this demo, we'll be talking through the compromised instances, the firewall vulnerabilities, the access, and the remediation pieces. The actual demo itself will highlight cloud anomaly detection, security health analytics, the audit log integration we have, DLP, the DLP data discovery, and cloud functions. Okay, actually, I'm right at the demo port. So if we can, let me log in, and then we'll switch to demo. Okay, so if we can switch to demo. Cool. So here is the Cloud Security Command Center. And as we said, this is the dashboard level view. And if we go look into the cloud anomaly detection, we can see there's a coin mining detection here. So if we go into this Command Center piece from a coin mining standpoint, we'll see resource involved in coin mining first discovered back in March 1st. So let's look in that in a little bit more detail. So discovered in March 1st against this particular project, Sec Demo Company IT Demo, on this instance, the compromised instance, it was writing back to a coin mining pool, Stackdrum pool, that was being abused from this IP using this publicly available IP for the instance. So we now know this is an actual threat that occurred. So how can we figure out what's going on? So first, we can go back in time and go to March 1st. All right, at that point, there's actually more things going on that piece. And specifically, we know what project this is about. So let's look for the details around that project. So we're able to see there's actually several things. There's some audit logs that have been triggered, which we'll explore. Anomaly detector itself found the thing that originally triggered it. And security health analytics has actually found that there's several open firewalls and also the use of a default network. If, in fact, we dig into this a little bit more, into what are the allowed protocols that were deployed, and then scoot down here. We're able to kind of look at open firewalls from an underlying firewall standpoint. If we go into the underlying firewalls, we can see the various allowed protocols, in this case TCP, open everywhere, kind of a bad thing for us to have. Shift this up so we can get to the close piece. And then if we were to actually look at the underlying audit logs, we can see there's a set of aggregated findings. Specifically, if we look at, say, the SSH firewall rule, it looks like that I was the bad guy in this case, back in March, compromising this firewall. If we now look at this, we understand that this firewall was disabled and allowed SSH back on March 1. We also now want to understand our blast radius. So if we go back to the asset, we know what the project was. From a project-centric view, it was this IT demo project. We go into the IT demo project, and we can see there's a lot of findings on this project, including a bunch of PII. So this project actually has access to a whole bunch of PII. We probably want to know where in detail that is. So what we can do then is go to that particular project, go to our DLP API, and then once we go to the DLP API, we see there's been a number of scans against that project. Let's go to this one. And this shows you email, social security number, credit card, how many of these. So we now understand what the blast radius, what the data in that compromised project is. So that's not a good thing. We probably want to fix this. And so what we can do now is go to our kind of cloud functions, which are set up in another project. And we've set up a number of cloud functions that can take action. So standard cloud functions are, let's say we want to change the bucket ACL. Number 2, we want to repair the firewall. We want to actually log the different events, and then we want to take a VM snapshot. So today what we're going to do is we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to repair the firewall and take the VM snapshot. So if you go look, currently SSH is allowed. So now if I go back to the pub sub topic, I can trigger a cloud function. I'm going to do this manually. You can also obviously do this through API. At the entry point piece, I'm going to publish the firewall message. Okay, now if we go back to this, it should take like 30 seconds or so for us to trigger. And then you can see the allowed SSH firewall is now currently disabled. We also want to take a snapshot because we want to capture the forensics. So this is a view of the current set of snapshots being taken on here. If we go back to the topics and we want to publish a message, the snapshot. And then now we go back to this. And this should take potentially sometimes up to like 30 seconds or so to trigger this. So the last one was April 5th. And we'll go through this. And then we'll go back and we'll see that the snapshot will have gotten recurred. So what have we done so far? So far what we've done is use threat detection to find the underlying threat, roll back and pivot on the project to find out what were the vulnerabilities in the project, roll through the audit logs to figure out who actually did the item, go into the actual asset view, understand what PII is accessible from that particular compromised project, explore in detail in that project exactly which bucket, where that PII is, and then take remediation action through cloud functions. So now if I roll through this again, looks like, oh, okay, actually this one got fired up on the 9th. So you'll see this one at 11:21 today, snapshot taken. So if we go back to the slides, cool, so we've gone through this demo end to end. What we're going to do in the next step is dive into each of the underlying pieces in a little bit more detail so you understand some of the additional nuances and capability in visibility, in prevention, in detection, in action, and in the data management pieces. So from a visibility standpoint, really our goal here is to allow you to see what you need to see. So that means asset state, asset history, finding state, finding history. Our asset state today is sample-based and scan-based, and so typically scans twice a day with the ability for you to do on-demand scanning for whenever you want, both programmatically in the UI. Our finding state is event-driven, so event detectors, when they find things, automatically update the finding pieces. One of the key things I think will be very useful for you all as customers is IAM policies on each of the attributes are surfaced in Command Center and can be part of the join parameters. In addition, we integrate with a lot of native, as we talked about, Google Cloud Security products. Anomaly detection, DLP, web vulnerabilities, infrastructure kind of vulnerabilities, audit logs, access transparency, cloud phishing protection, which is another product being announced today. And then we integrate with a range of partner findings. And these can be consumed, again, via UI or API. So what we're going to show you in the demo is not all these things, but we're going to highlight some of the key things to go forward. So if we can switch back to the demo. So if we go back now on the demo, we're going to go back to the org level here, and then go to Command Center. So as we talked about, from a visibility standpoint, at the dashboard level, you have the assets, and you can roll back, say, 7 days, and immediately see what has changed across all the asset pieces. You similarly have the ability to look at your findings, and your findings are basically two of the key new products we've announced. Security Health Analytics and Event Threat Detection give you here the top items. They're all in the high category that you should be addressing vulnerability-wise. Here are the threat detections that we found, persistent anomalous grant, bad domains, and then the underlying details. Each of the detectors, anomaly detection, data discovery, scanners, all have their own card. And also our open source project, Forseti, integrates naturally into Command Center, so you can see all those things. The dashboards cards give you a set of alerting. When there's something in there, they go red. Phishing protection is not finding anything, so that's in the green state. Now, if you go into the underlying inventories, you can, at the asset side, look at things from a project-centric view. So you can either look at all 3,000 plus assets org level, or if you look at a particular project, you can see the project details, the resources, all 55 just related to that project. You can query. So for example, if I wanted to find, let's say, all resources which were instances across your whole org, in this case, across your whole org, instances without an S. This gives you all the different VMs and how many VMs are in each of the different underlying projects. Instead, you can choose to slice this by resource type. This gives you all your different resources in GCP that we track. You can sort them, obviously, by count. You can individually query on them. So if I want to just find buckets, I can get to that. So as, obviously, the increasing set of our resources goes up, you have the ability to do that. Also, from an asset change standpoint, we can look at what's changed in the last day. So there's been 12 things changed in the last day. We flipped a number of compute instances, and we've generated a number of disks. You can also look at what's been deleted. So basically, 2 instances and their disks plus an instant template, part of the standard piece in that for that cluster of its cycling through things. In addition, if we go back to all things, and then at the project level, you can look at what this organization looked like back in time. So if we go back to, let's say, a year ago, actually we'll go truly a year ago, you'll see far fewer projects. There was only about 10 projects at a time. And so this is the full time history. It's also append only. Once you write data here, it can be updated, but it can't be changed from what you wrote. And it's 13 months of live history that's kept in Command Center. That's true of the findings, and that's true of the assets. If we now rotate over to the findings side, one of the key things that we're able to show is, similarly, we can look at what has just changed today. There have been 471 active findings. Let's see what's changed in the last, say, hour. In the last hour, 4 things have happened that are new. Basically, if you look from a disk standpoint, create a snapshot. That was a snapshot we just created, as well as I changed the firewall rule. So both of those things are available here in what's new. Another piece that's important is some of the integration we have with other Google native products, like Access Transparency. So if you've heard of Access Transparency, what we do with Access Transparency is provide you visibility into when a Googler accesses your data and for what purpose. So here we can see back on March 25th, we had 3 different customer-initiated support requests. So if we drill into that, what you're able to see in Command Center is first is a cloud storage access by Googler in the US, in a US resource type, for a customer-initiated reason, and explicitly with the case number. So you have the ability in Command Center to see and have full visibility of when Googlers access your data and for what reason. We're also at GCP announcing access approvals for you to also enable for certain sets of data your ability to block a Googler's ability to access that explicitly and put yourself in the decision chain. From an overall visibility standpoint, findings as well have the history piece. And then one other thing that's important in terms, and you'll see this more in the data management part of our demo, is that you can use marks to essentially overall manage your data. So I have 10,000 plus resources on the findings. I have 3,000 plus assets. What if I just want to look at the prod items? So what I've now done is filter down to just the 45 items in prod using these marks. These marks can be added to any finding or any asset. So an example of this is, let's say I want to take this item and go ahead and add a mark and turn its environment into prod. And these are fully ACLed. So these marks only exist in Command Center. They're controlled by individual separate roles. So now if I go back and look for environment again, mark, environment, prod. You'll see now that, and we have to hit now. You'll see now we've added one more. So you have the ability to those marks are controlled and ackled by roles, and you have then the ability to organize the data, and certainly say in a threat hunting situation, these marks are not visible to the underlying resource owners. You also can use them to hold state if you're integrating with workflows. So if we now switch back to the slides, we've talked about the visibility piece. Now we're going to talk about vulnerability prevention. So as I pointed out, vulnerabilities, weaknesses, misconfigurations are a huge source of breaches. From cyber insurance kind of claims, almost 70% of issues that have been caused for breaches are due to some sort of either misconfiguration, negligence, or malfeasance. So from our standpoint, it's very important to enable you to have a better view of what's weak in your system. And we have two of our products that are focused on that I'll talk about. One, which again, we're announcing to public alpha today, is Security Health Analytics. And what Security Health Analytics does is a managed service for automated scanning across your GCP resources. We detect 30 common vulnerabilities, and we run that scan automatically, give you both the detailed vulnerabilities and the summary of those, and it's fully integrated in the Cloud Security Command Center. So some of the examples of things we scan for, a number of storage level vulnerabilities, networking vulnerabilities, logging and monitoring disabled. As you know, if you don't have logging and monitoring enabled, if something bad happens, it's very hard for you to reconstruct many times. VM instance level detections, as well as focusing on GKE and GKE cluster weaknesses. From a demo standpoint, again, we'll show you the summary card, which you've already seen, and then dive into some of the detailed pieces. If we can switch back to the demo. Cool. So if we go back to the finding side, actually we'll go to the dashboard first. We can already see the Security Health Analytics card is the first thing that you see. Currently, there's 1,000+ findings. These are the high priority ones, open firewall, public ACL, not surprisingly. These are ones that folks care about. If we go look in specific Security Health Analytics, you have the ability to look at summary data, which then gives you their 89 current issues around public bucket policy, only disabled. As you know, GCS recently launched a feature which allows you to explicitly disable the use of object-level permissions and only manage the permissions on your bucket through the bucket-level permissions. So we check for how many buckets in your system have actually are not taking advantage of this. When you don't take advantage of this, you can have a disjoint situation where your object permissions are more open than your bucket permissions, and that can create the kind of weaknesses and breaches. So we automatically detect for things like that. To get a kind of a sense of all the different finding types, let's look at what we do here. As we look through, let me repaint this. So some of the kind of key vulnerabilities we find, a bunch of monitoring ones, the use of default networks, IP aliases, IP forwarding enabled from a GCE standpoint, bucket ACLs, public addresses, and then open firewalls. If we're looking at one of these open firewall rules, what we provide you ultimately is, what the firewall rule is, kind of what the underlying rule is, what you could do to restrict it, and then the ability, if you think this is actually should be correct, we give you per detector, per asset level whitelisting. So you can use those security marks I talked about, mark that asset, and that will no longer show up on your overall scan. On an ongoing basis, we can look back from a findings change standpoint and look for, nothing has changed in the last hour for this. We typically run these twice a day. So over the last full day, nothing has changed. Refresh. And then if we look at the news sources on a security health standpoint in the last, say, 14 days, you'll see that this has been a stable case of vulnerability for a while, which again indicates that there should be remediation actions that we do on this. So now if we switch back to the slides. Cool. So we talked about SHA, both the vulnerabilities, summaries, as well as the underlying description. We have curated severity type on each of those vulnerabilities, recommend what to do, and also give you the ability to whitelist them. Let's see if we can advance. There we go. In addition, what we've announced as a part of the vulnerability detection is enhancing our cloud security scanner, which is an app-level vulnerability and a web vulnerability scanner. It's now in beta for GCE and GKE, and it detects 13 common application vulnerabilities. It has both API and UI controls and fully integrated into Command Center. Amongst the things that it detects are a whole variety of cross-site scripting types, misconfigurations in the actual content being exchanged in HTTP, HTTPS, and vulnerable resources, right? The accessibility of Git repositories, of SVN, insecure libraries used, clear text password in the underlying application level. One of the key things here is that this, again, allows you at an application level to scan individual applications which are publicly facing, find out what those web vulnerabilities are, and then see that holistically in the Cloud Security Command Center. It's also the underlying technology is what we use internal Google for all of our applications before they're made public as well, so that we can find things like cross-site scripting and these type of issues. We're now going to switch to threat detection. So as I mentioned before, right, so detection for us is about finding bad guys doing bad things. And we have two types of threat detection integrated in the Cloud Security Command Center. With our beta launch, we had integrated the cloud anomaly detection, which was using data from outside and around the VMs and instances, so behavioral data. Today, with the private beta launch of the event threat detection, we're now also able to, if you enable stack driver logs, take that data in and look at what's going on within the system through the logs. So ETD, which is going private beta, is log-based threat detection looking from the inside. It's a managed service. It leverages our existing Google Threat Intelligence that we use to protect Google, based on a combination of audit logs, VPC flow logs, firewall logs, GCE logs, based on Fluentd. It can take logs from either GCP or using the Fluentd agent, any hybrid or all other cloud set of logs that are based on the Fluentd provider. And then moving forward, the goal for ETD is not just to be centered on Google logs, but any logs you can provide that we can integrate in and apply detectors. We're initially launching with 6 detectors, and I'll talk more about in detail, right? You see them on the right: malware, crypto mining, phishing, IAM abuse, outgoing DDoS, and then brute force SSH. Similarly, previously with our Command Center beta launch and even with the alpha launch, we had integrated cloud anomaly detection. And this is based on threat detections from outside the system. So common things like network volumetrics, performance, bad IPs, service accounts found in Git, and integrating that data. So now we have 2 sides of the problem covered from a threat detection. It initially launched with 7 detectors, many overlapping, but also including things like data exfiltration, unusual activity based on volumetrics, also fully integrated with Command Center. From a demo standpoint, since we showed anomaly detection in the first end-to-end, we're going to focus on event threat detection in the demo. So if we switch back over to the demo. Cool. So if we go to ETD, actually we need to go kill the filter. To ETD, you'll see that we have a number of bad domain and persistent anomalous grants. So let's look at one of these persistent anomalous grants. So this IAM grant occurred today at 8 in the morning. And so we're able to first obviously tell you when the event was, what source the data came from. It's an example when we see these anomalous and kind of highly risky grants, an example of persistence. It's a high detection criteria priority because we think it's a very strong signal. You can see that it was an ad of this particular user at Gmail, and it was done by essentially Stan Petrov at Gmail. So using the role, adding the role editor and binder. So we have quite a bit of information. Also, what project it was done in to start pivoting on either the user or the project to do the further detections. So with event threat detection, you have now log-based information. With CAD, you have the behavioral information all in one place for the Cloud Security Command Center as you look at your threats and investigate them further. If we can switch back to the slides. The final piece is this has to date been about visibility, detection, and now we're going to talk about the response piece. So for response, it's really, can I stop the bleeding? Can I limit the blast radius? And can I recover? For us today, that's done through a combination of PubSub and then Cloud Functions. You saw some of that in the end-to-end demo. We have a set, is shipped even with our beta launch of Command Center, a set of example applications that show you how to configure PubSub to be triggered off of Command Center to then trigger Cloud Functions. As a part of the GA launch, we'll also be shipping those 5 Cloud Function examples for you so you can integrate and use those directly. And we're happy to announce today as a part an alpha integration with our own Stackdriver IRM system, which I'm going to demo. So kind of summary, PubSub is the mechanism by which we're triggering these things. Cloud Functions give you and us the ability to continue to build out a security function library to help you take action. You can also add to that off of those topics. And then when you think about end-to-end incident management, it's about connecting then to our IRM product. Since we demoed the Cloud Functions before, we're going to now switch and show the IRM integration. So if we can switch back to the deck, cool. So this is going to be played as a movie. So where we are here is we are in the finding detail. You're able to pick one of the findings. In that finding, in the upper right, you can manage it in IRM. You get to select a workspace. In this case, we pre-created a workspace. That adds that finding as a signal that's possible. You can either add it and create a new incident. You can add it to an existing incident, or you can dismiss it. In this case, we're going to add it to a new incident. Now it's sitting in that underlying incident. We can also look at what other signals and incidents are ongoing. And so you can see there's a number of alerts from Command Center that we could add in over the last 3 days, as well as there are currently 2 incidents set up. If we pick that original incident we just did, we can now go ahead and look from the available ones, add another incident, or add another signal to it, and now that incident has 2 of the Cloud Security Command Center signals as a part of it. Now, when we navigate back to that incident, we can go and look again into the individual signals that are part of the incident, and that can pull us back into the Cloud Security Command Center to look back at the finding. And you can see we're back at the original finding. So the goal here then is to allow you, when you think about now the incident management piece, you have the option to connect to your own incident flow, or if you want to leverage Google best practices, Google's SRE flow and incident management flow, that's all encoded in our own incident management system. So you have that flexibility. Again, PubSub and APIs are the way you can connect. So you're not required to use IRM, but this is a native integration that will make that path simpler. If we can go back to the slides. So the last piece is data management. So obviously with these demos, I've pre-curated a lot of the data. So we're going to talk about, like in a more real situation, how do you manage complexity? As any of you guys know who are security practitioners, the problem usually isn't too little signal. It's usually a lot of signal in figuring out what is meaningful, what's not. So some of the things that we use to manage this are, number 1, security marks, which allow you to actually organize and structure the data. The ability to mute findings, and in the UI or in the API, set things to active or inactive, and we'll show that. And then also for you to freely use how you want the data to go, whether you want to manage it in Command Center or take it out of Command Center and integrate it with some of our underlying partners. From a demo standpoint, we're going to do a quick live thing with the security marks and the active-inactive, and then we're going to show you exporting to Splunk and then also exporting to GCS buckets, and finally talk about our partners. So if we can go back to the demo. So if I go to the underlying findings, And now, instead of like curating, I turn on all the active findings. You'll see that we have active and inactive over 11,000 findings. So first, the ability to decide only to show active findings cuts 11,000 down to, say, 1046. But using the marking system, I can go to, I just want to look at my anomaly ones. So I've marked a set of things which are just anomaly. And that filters that down if we redraw just to the 7 items tied to anomaly. But maybe I also want to look at the items related to, say, SHA. So I want to do sources, source, SHA. That kind of gives us the ability to look at those in unison. I can then decide, you know what? Maybe there's an incident that we talked about before, and I actually just want to look at all the findings related to that incident. So, and in this case, I called it this. So that allows you to mark across the various different findings all the incidents that are related to what you're looking at, which are then these 17. We can also go back to the assets. Those similar can be marked for incidents. And that filters down just to 32 items within that particular thing. You can go back to the dashboard. The dashboard now is just filtered down to just the 32 assets and just the findings related to that incident. If, for example, one of those findings, let's just say this default network finding, we actually now want to mark as inactive, we can go to the info panel on the action, change the state to inactive, save it, run now, and then rejoin, and you'll see the default network no longer is in there. So you have the ability to mute and manage those in the UI. Everything we show you here is also available through API, and so you have that ability to manage. So the last demo we're going to show is really around export and the management of your data in either GCS or Splunk. So what we're doing here is basically from the finding standpoint, we want to export all the findings. So we go to the Splunk connector we've built. That connector basically can be configured is written in App Engine, can configure with a cron. We can basically run that, and whatever you filtered and set up will dump to Splunk. We switch now to Splunk, and you can see, let's go back to when we've loaded this previously in the previous week. We had 8,000 plus events. We can go rotate on that to look at the underlying categories, because categories are going to be where the kind of key issues are found. Splunk automatically sorts this. We find a number of open firewall items. We're able to dig into each of those items in the Splunk side around the underlying fields that are included, plus the ability to look at the data that's prescribed. In addition to the Splunk integration, which you can see, you can now process and manage that outside of GCP. We can also have the ability, if you want to free download this into and export it into a bucket. So if we go at a high level, we're basically able to, in the command center, either assets or findings, go to pick the export function. And that function allows you to select what project and what bucket to dump to. We're able to then, at that point, pick the SCC to Splunk bucket, select from the different buckets, define our own file. In this case, it'll be finding dump number 4. I should have typed faster. And then once you have that running, you can export all 9,000 plus results as JSON into that bucket. If we go to actually look at that bucket, you'll see after a couple of refreshes, probably about 10 to 15 seconds, that will all dump itself out. And then if we go just to the end, we'll see that from that kind of refresh, we'll have the fourth one. In real time, that took about 20 seconds. And so we now have the ability to look at all these pieces in either exported or provided into Splunk. So we can switch back to the slides. So today, we spent a lot of time talking about the native capabilities within Cloud Security Command Center as we go GA. It's also important that we have a vibrant ecosystem because you, as customers, are using a whole range of existing security providers. And those security providers have joined with us to integrate and be able to provide their findings in the Command Center so you can see things in one place, as well as a number of them taking the results from Command Center out to use them with their own products. And this is just the beginning of a increasing number of partners that we'll have in our ecosystem to enable you as customers to bring the key pieces of technology that you want all into one place. So I'm going to summarize. Again, we're very excited today to announce the GA launch of the Cloud Security Command Center. It includes an increasing set of underlying assets in GCP that we inventory for you, the ability from an analysis standpoint to do search filtering, time diff assets and findings, to take action. We've also announced G-Cloud, so if your preferred mode is the UI, you can use the UI. If your preferred mode is the API, we have 7 of the key language libraries available. We have examples that will be turning on next week, or actually tomorrow, for 4 of those libraries, and with more of those coming in the next couple weeks. So you'll have not only the libraries themselves, but all examples for all 7. Or you can use command line with G-Cloud. We're able to, through a number of example applications, show you how to create notifications, trigger cloud functions, and then from a partners, both native and overall integrations, a range of partners that have integrated the results so you can see all of that in one place. So to get started, Cloud Security Command Center, you can enable that in a self-serve way through Marketplace. You can also, as we talked about, as you get more and more findings, manage those through security marks. Once you enable Cloud Security Command Center, you can immediately turn on Cloud Anomaly Detection. And then with both Security Scanner and DLP, you can enable those. And if you set up security scanning in DLP, you can proceed forward to have those results surface in. You should sign up for both the Security Health Analytics Public Alpha and also the Event Threat Detection Private Beta. Those will, once you're enabled onto those, they'll feed the results in. You probably already have favorite partners, and so if they're on that list, you can go to Marketplace, find them, integrate in the Command Center, and lastly, if you want to close the loop with response, take action through the Cloud Functions. Many of the partners we've talked about from a native standpoint are having talks today and tomorrow, so if you want to learn more about whether it's the cloud phishing protection, whether it's DLP, ETD, Event Threat Detection, the IRM pieces, or the binary authorization pieces we've integrated in. You can see all of that through talks at Next, and I encourage you to do that.